Hey, what's up, everybody? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day you are choosing to watch these videos. So hopefully by this point you have gone through kind of the lecture one stuff, a lot of that course introductory stuff. I know it's a little bit boring, but I hope I kept it kind of funny and weird for you. Weird in a good way, not the connotation it has now. But you made your way through that, and then before you've started this video, you have gone through some of the pre-material questions or pre-lecture questions and submitted those on Canvas before you're watching this. So if that's not the case, pause, take a step back, go back to the When Mal is Away module, and please look at, there's 3 questions, super simple, super easy. Just put down what you know about the content we're going to cover in this lecture, and then submit that, and then come back to this video. Okay? Okay. So what we're going to do today is kind of look at feedbacks and kind of into this intro idea of feedback systems and or systems just in general. Let's get into it. For class 2, or like class/lab 2. So our goals for today include defining systems terminology a little bit here, mainly feedbacks, and reading and interpreting simple systems diagrams, and how you could evaluate a diagram's fit into a description of a system. I know the word system is in there a lot, I feel like. But that's kind of the overall idea within this lecture material, lecture/lab material. So I do also want to mention here that I will have, that there's a couple of other assignments included with this. So you have the pre-lecture questions that hopefully you are already turned in, which I'll have on the next slide. And then you have like a feedback loops assignment kind of going into this idea of these systems diagram situations. So if you look at that assignment, you're like, what in the F is this? Come back to these videos to help you aid in that. So these are some of the questions I asked you to answer before you started watching this video today. So I wanted you to describe how a bathtub works, being very descriptive, and describing how a thermostat works, again, being very descriptive, and then just this general overview of what is a feedback loop. So I'm really curious to see what y'all had to say and see how that kind of incorporates into what we're going to talk about. So here's my bathtub visually. Clearly not an actual oval. I am not fancy pants enough to have a claw-footed bathtub. I actually can't even really formally fit in bathtubs because I'm too freaking tall. You'll see. But basically, you in a basic sense, you have a faucet, you have a bathtub, and you have a drain, right? You have water coming in, you have water being stored in a tub, and water draining out, right? So we're gonna kind of put some systems terminology into this idea. So this idea of a reservoir. So that a reservoir is a place where matter or energy resides. So you could think of like a stock or a pool or storage. So where do you keep all of that stuff? Where is it stored? So a reservoir. You can also, of course, our general idea of the term reservoir, like where we keep water, for example, like the Lafayette Reservoir, if you're familiar with the East Bay. I know a lot of folks kind of walk around the Lafayette Reservoir and stuff, but it's kind of a way to think about that. So we can measure the amount of a substance within a reservoir. So we can look at, again, kind of going back to the Lafayette Reservoir, we can see how full or not full it is by looking at the water level. If we have, say, like a hydro flask, we can say how much water is in this reservoir in liters or milliliters, or this is not a liter. Oh, it's ounces, like 40 ounces are in this, right? Or gallons. That's just a kind of a way to think about this idea of this term reservoir. The next term we're going to introduce is flux. So the term flux is defined as the rate of matter or energy movement, right? So, and we usually describe that in the amount per unit time. So in this case, like how much water is coming in is a term of an influx versus how much water is leaving is what we would call an outflux. And it's also considered a rate, right? So how much water flowing through the faucet, you could talk about that in liters per second or drops per minute if it's a very leaky faucet, right? Maybe, if you're looking for a new shower head, perhaps they kind of advertise it in like, oh, you get like this much, liters per second to conserve water, or something like that. It's been a while since I've bought a shower head, so if that's not a reasonable analogy, I apologize. I'm also like delirious right now, so hopefully some of these analogies will just be pretty dumb. So of course the drain also represents the output or the outflow. So again, that would have to be considered a rate, just like the influx, outflux, or outflow or output is the same. And if you were to consider like comparing these two, like the faucet versus the drain or the inflow versus the outflow, it has to be, you have to consider the same units, right? So if you're going to consider the faucet, you'd be like, oh yeah, the faucet is inflowing at blah 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 liters per second. To compare the two in a good comparative way, you would also have to talk about the drain in liters per second, even if it's not actually draining in liters per second. Say it's like, say you have really long hair, and so there's a lot of hair in the drain. I know it's going to be gross, but a lot of hair in the drain, so it's not draining very well. You would still, to have a good comparison between the two, use the same units, if that makes sense. So what we're considering here is what we call an open system. So there's not really much between, there's nothing up top closing it off and connecting it to the drain, right? There's nothing really here to kind of close this loop, to close this system. So we have not connected both of these ends, so this is considered an open system. So if you wanted to draw a closed system, what might you add? So consider pausing this video, and what would you add here to maybe close this system up a little bit? So right now, there's nothing above the faucet, there's nothing under the drain. So think about, how would you close this off? Pause. So if you considered things like a hot water heater and then maybe a basement tank or something, again, your closed system would include your own hot water heater, water in the bathtub, and which would drain out into a basement tank. Of course, this is considering you wanted to, if you wanted to draw a more closed system, what would you want to do? Disconnecting from the town water. How would you make this a completely closed loop and closed system, basically going from your basement tank back to your hot water heater? What could you add here? Now we have not any unconnected arrows, but if you wanted to really close it up with a feedback loop, you would add a purifier, right? So we're going to use this term feedback loop several times. And I'll end this video describing what a feedback loop is. But before, looking at this particular imagery, I want you to consider, what do you think a feedback loop is? Obviously I'm alluding that this is a feedback loop. So maybe consider that and think about ways that this might be a good or a bad thing, or ways that generally feedbacks in general could be, right? So if we close this off with a feedback loop, a purifier would be added in here, right? So now we have a nice full circle. So we started off with an open system, just a faucet, a tub, and a drain. And then we kind of started to close it off a little bit with the kind of starting point and ending point. And now we've completely closed it off into its own sustainable loop by adding in this extra arrow here and being a purifier, right? So you would have a water purifier. So say you're going completely off grid, screw everybody, I'm making my own water, or whatever. This would be that sort of idea. So a feedback loop, in a sense, is something what we call cause and effect, right? So there's two different types of feedback loops that we're going to talk about. One's a positive feedback loop, which is an amplifier of a response. The next is a negative feedback loop, and that's something that dampens a response. So this idea that a positive feedback loop, or an easier way to think about it, is that positive is reinforcing and negative is balancing. So in this case, I want you to break your connotation of what you know the word positive meaning and the word negative meaning, and you're actually going to kind of flip it on its head. In this case, generally positive does not mean good and negative does not necessarily mean bad. So kind of an interesting little situation that we have here. So before you move on to the next video, I want to make sure that you really fully understand this idea of feedback loop. So actually almost kind of jumping ahead from question 1 to question 3 from your questions from pre-lecture or pre-material. And now we'll talk a little bit about a thermostat in the following video. So thank you so much for humoring me with this bathtub situation. Thanks for watching.